Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I'm thankful to have Eddy Arriola with me today. Eddy is the chairman and CEO of Apollo Bank, a Miami based full service commercial bank with over $850 million in total assets. Eddy, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. No, I'm glad we connected and had a chance to get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you. And I appreciate it. It's an honor for me. So, take us back to the beginning, where you grew up, your family situation, and what type of kid you were.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Miami, Florida. I still live here, so I'm a local kid. And this has always been my home. So I come from so I'm a product of a Cuban American family, and so the stories a little bit well told of how this group for the most part came in 1960 after revolution. It's a very unique situation where you had this influx of um, you know generally speaking well educated people, sort of an entrepreneurial group that came kind of really like a short distance, but left with the shirts on their back, but a little bit different um, in that especially initially were sort of kind of welcomed by at least the federal government to this country, so that had kind of an open door, which is not the case for for every immigrant story. Um, but also but they came here without language and resources, and again different than many immigrant stories. A lot of times immigrants come, I'm never going to go back. For the most part, Cuban Americans are like, we're once the Marines at the beach, we're all going back to our homes, and that's it's never happened. And so very much a product of that community, a very entrepreneurial group that was very strongly bound together, and over the past now 60 years have built a great thriving community, and made Miami an incredible international city. So I was part of that, and born in the early 70s, and part of that changing Miami community. I come from a family of 5 kids, as I was sharing with you. So I'm 4 boys, youngest is a girl. We're all sports fanatics. Um, at that time, it was great to be a football fan in Miami. We had the Dolphins and later the Miami Hurricanes, and grew up playing sports um, and that sort of thing. So that's a little bit of sort of early origins.
Yeah. Talk to me about the influence of being Cuban. Um, if I'm not wrong, right? No one was allowed to go there until like President Obama, right?
Yeah.
Recently.
So generally, so I'm going to make some general statements. My experience is obviously not the experience of most people, but I think it's a very unique, um, you know, immigrant, sort of subset, in that, generally speaking, especially sort of the first wave that was able to sort of leave and want to leave, were people that were, sort of chased out, or sort of saw the writing on the wall, and that you had um, uh, a socialist, it became communist, violent revolution. And, the people that they were violent against was, sort of the, the business owners and the educated, and, and that sort of thing. So a group, came here, with no resource, not knowing the language, or wealth or property, that sort of thing. But they did come here sort of, in a sense, together. Um, and a very, very proud group. And as I mentioned, again, sort of making a gross statement, or a general statement. A vast majority of the group were like, we're here and we love America, and thanks for opening our arms, but we're going back, and the U.S. isn't going to allow, a Soviet allied country 90 miles from their shores, when they have an alternative. They had a group that can just go back and govern if we just a little help. So there was always, that was always sort of a conversation, a topic of, we're going back, we're going back, we're going back. But you weren't allowed to go back, and for a variety of different reasons, until um, until you could, well, so I hesitate, because you could go back, but under certain conditions. You had to go under either a humanitarian license, or if you had family there. Um, so it was very difficult to go. But also within the community, it was very, the community being the Cuban American community in Miami, it was frowned upon to go back. And I know, many stories of, my parents' friends who still had family members in Cuba in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even, early 2000s, that said, I want, my grandmother, my great aunt's there and she's dying. I want to see her before she dies. And they would have
Yeah.
to keep it secret. And it would be like a closely guarded secret. You wouldn't even tell family members that you went back to go visit a family member. So it was frowned upon. So I grew up that was, you can never go back. You can never go back until the Marines hit the beach, um, or there's a change in government. My brothers and I, again, we grew up in that sort of, mind frame. Um, my older brother and I were very involved in the Obama campaign, going back to, when he first announced. So, and, thinking about in the fall of 2006 and, beginning of 2007. And so we were, early advisors about, Latin America foreign policy issues, and specifically about Cuba. And and we were like, this is crazy. We never even been to Cuba, and we're advised. So as soon as he became president, we're like in a conversation with different people. And we're like, I can't believe we've never gone back to Cuba. And so me and two of my brothers went to Cuba in March of 2009 for the first time. We went under a humanitarian license, and it was incredible. And as soon as we got to that night, the first night we were there, we thought about all the stories that we had always heard of, the grass is greener, the mountains are more beautiful, the sky is bluer, the water's clearer. And we thought it was BS. And we got there and, the water was clear, the sky was bluer, and the air was, more comforting. And we called our dad that night and we're like, you should be here. You should be there. And like, he broke down. He's like, I don't know why I'm not there. And it was like, his lifetime just sort of saying, can't go back, and being like, why am I not there with my sons? And he ended up going a month later. So that was a long story, but that's a little bit of sort of the backdrop of sort of, family conflicts of the issue of, wanting to go and wanting to learn, but you can't. And sort of the issues of the community of, making lives and building success stories in the United States, but always being torn back, to a homeland.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting because I'm thinking about my own parents, and it obviously they can go visit India anytime they want to. So it's such an interesting dynamic.
Yeah,
And
and India's far.
yes,
It's right
yes,
there from
yeah,
Miami. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm,
Lily is far too.
mm.
Um, especially given what you do today, as a as a an entrepreneur, with Inktel Direct and now Apollo Bank. Was that something that was introduced to you at a young age, or when did that come into
Yeah.
your fruition?
So I would say, um, if I, I think, coming over. So I was born in the United States. Both of my grandfathers were entrepreneurs. My father was an entrepreneur. I didn't really see anyone that was, a doctor or a lawyer or that worked for anyone else. And so I think that was just sort of ingrained, and that was the model. And sort of the stories that were celebrated were entrepreneurial success stories. Again, especially in the Cuban American, again, making a general statement. The Cuban Americans came here and they didn't have the same access to, to education, that sort of that first generation. So to become a doctor or lawyer wasn't as common a thing or a goal, because you didn't understand, the language. It just wasn't a thing that you sort of, planned for. And so there's, again, a lot of entrepreneurial success stories, and those were the ones that were sort of, looking back, celebrated in my house. And then later on, sort of the stories I was, driven to would be, the Steve Jobs of the world, and that sort of thing. So I just always, I never thought about. I just never did. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not. I viewed it negatively or whatever. I just never. And I remember I went, like you, I went to Boston College, and a bunch of my friends were, in the Carroll School of Management, and I was, studying business and working, but I wasn't. I was arts and science, and like, well, you care a lot about business. I was the only one that had a Wall Street Journal subscription and read it every day. And they're like, why are you not like, how are you gonna like, what's your plan to get a job? I'm like, I'm gonna start my own company. What are you gonna do? I'm like, I don't know, you know. But I just never like they would ask those questions. I'm like, why are they like why are they asking that question like it's weird? Of
Yeah.
course. And
Because
they
you grew up in an environment where that's what you
yeah,
saw.
that's what you
Yeah.
do, and that's the norm. So I always thought about that. I've literally never had a boss. Um, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I've
Yeah.
I had one job interview was with President Barack Obama. I was considered
Wow.
for a position in his administration, and that was it. I'd never
Yeah.
thought about working for anyone else except him, and and we'll probably get to it. I almost this past year worked for someone else when we were going to sell our business, and that was really weird.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. So, you mentioned Boston College. Talk to me about your junior and senior year of high school thought process. Miami to Boston's a, different, different city, different, what drew you to BC or,
yeah,
uh,
so I have, or it's funny. So I have an 18-year-old daughter who's a senior now, thinking about college, and my son's 21 years old. He goes to Middlebury College in Vermont, and so we have gone through the. And they're like, "How did you pick BC?" And when they hear my reasons, they think it's ridiculous. So number one, quite frankly, I was in seventh grade at the game in 1984. Doug Flutie,
oh,
Thanksgiving
yeah.
weekend, playing the University of Miami, and that was the year he won the Heisman.
Yep.
And I thought that was the absolute greatest thing. And even though I grew up around University of Miami football, I wanted to go away to college. And
Wait, so you saw the Flutie pass
yeah,
to
yeah,
Phelan? Oh,
yeah.
wow. That's
So,
cool.
so I was in seventh grade, and again, it was like Thanksgiving weekend, and it was such a big deal. And we were my father had season tickets, so we were on the visitor sideline on the 30-yard line, so kind of near that end zone, and and I remember the story. So again, I don't know if you know the football game. So UM was killing BC the first half, killing them, and there were two college kids. To us, they were much older, but they were now looking back, they were college kids that were in Miami for the weekend, and they were drunk, and we were a bunch. I was my dad had seen tickets, but I was also there with four of my friends, and we were yelling, "Oh, BC, this you guys are losing." And they were sort of egging us on. We were egging them. We had a good time. And at halftime, I remember it was they were like getting kind of like, "We're out of here. We're going to Miami Beach to party." And we're like, "See you later."
Yeah.
And we remember laughing, and they're like, "Oh, where should we go?" And we're like, "We're not even in high school. We don't know where to go."
Yeah.
I remember like it was yesterday. And then they left, and then BC came back there. And then to this day, I'm thinking, I wish I knew who those two kids were.
Yeah.
That for the rest of the, I wonder if they tell
Oh,
people they
man.
were like saw the play, or because maybe that's what they remember in their mind.
Yeah.
But they left and took off. So that was how it got on my radar screen. And also on the radar screen of my older brother. My older brother ended up going to Boston College, so
Hmm.
I visited and really liked it. And even though I didn't play Division One sports, I loved big time sports. I wanted to be around that environment. That was sort of the picture I had in my head of what college life was like. Neither one of my parents went to college, and I wanted to go away and be around that environment. And so yeah, so that was why I liked BC.
Yeah. How was as you look back, uh, I don't want to say, I mean, I guess the environment you grew up was different, but I don't think the word entrepreneurship in the 90s was as big as it is today.
Yeah, it
You know,
definitely
it,
was. Uh, in college, I can't. I never heard anyone talk about starting their own business. Not one person. When
yeah.
everyone talked about it, was like, oh, can I get a job interview at Morgan Stanley? Can I work for Fidelity? Um, Not one, or if it wasn't that, there were, you know, they were in the school of nursing, or they were going to be a teacher, they were going to join the armed services, um, or they're going to go to grad school or law school, but that was it. No one was really thinking about. Again, I couldn't think of any one person, and I remember at that time it was a little pre-internet, but post college, you started to see some level of internet, and I had like one friend that had started like a brewing company in the mid. I'm like, wow, oh, there's another guy that is the way he thinks and that sort of thing. And but yeah, that definitely wasn't a thing. And even my friends from high school, very, especially were thinking about that in college. They thought about it later on. They'd work for someone and then go start a business. But it definitely wasn't a conversation of anyone I knew, thinking about I want to start my own business.
Yeah. So I guess, what did you? I guess for if you had any advice to people, in terms of taking advantage of their college education, does anything come to mind with regards to that?
Regarding,
If they want to become a, start their own business.
yeah, so I mean, I in a couple things. So one is, you want to start look, I think with anything in life, looking, for role models and sort of like, I think I want my life to look like this, to go down this path, and it never ends up that way. But you have more power than in my experience, you have more power than you realize, and sort of, drafting, creating a story, and that's where you can certainly create a, um, sort of a, not necessarily a script, but an outline. And I do believe that you can, create a script for how you want to live your life, and your story, and you're going to have twists and turns, but you do have more agency than especially sort of nowadays in the United States, and that sort of thing. So one is, think about your role models, and who you want to be, and follow them, and learn and observe, and that's right, and get to know the real story, right? So, as we all know now, the story of Steve Jobs is not that he's always up on stage at the annual, conference, and he's, solving every problem. That he had a very, very complex life, and a lot of twists and turns, and he was kicked out of his company and started other companies, and the story.
Yep.
But think about, role models, and get to really know the story, and am I willing to pay the price for that? The other is to get as much exposure as you can, whether it's, volunteering, whether it's, if you're in a position of like, you're in the purchasing department for a big company, and what is your job, as you start thinking about what you want to do, is like, include in the RFP process, other entrepreneurial firms, and when they're coming to give their pitch, hear their story. So I think as much as exposure as you can get, and ask, the real hard questions, and look sort of beneath the hood, is certainly, one thing that you can do. Obviously, reading and listening to podcasts and that sort of thing. And again, get to sort of know the real story, because there's a significant price you have to pay for that type of lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to us about what your thought process and what you ended up. I think
Yeah.
Avanti
So,
and
so,
Casehoid.
so right after, so I was trying to, so let me take a little bit of a step back. So in the summer of '92, in 1991, I was always interested in government and politics and that sort of thing. So in the fall of 1991, so there was a presidential election in 1992. At that time, again, everyone assumed George Bush was going to win a second term, and things started to turn. I'm like, oh, I'm interested in government and politics. There's a wide open, I was a Democrat. There's a wide open field. Being in Boston, it's really close to New Hampshire, and the New Hampshire primary was really important, because at that time, one of the guys running for the Democratic nomination was a guy named Tom Harkin, who was a U.S. senator from Iowa. So he had Iowa locked up. So it's always Iowa or New Hampshire. So New Hampshire became really important. So all the candidates were going to be there. It was really important. I'm like, wow, I'm right down the way, is a great way to get involved. Let me find a candidate to follow and see if I can get involved. And the candidate, the campaign decided to get involved in was the Bill Clinton campaign, and that was fun and interesting. Obviously, he won the nomination, but at that time, it was crazy. He had all the women issues and the draft dodging
Yeah.
issues, and
I mean, he was a big underdog.
big underdog,
Yeah.
and the Southerner up in that area. So it was a really cool to follow, and he was the underdog, and you like sports stories and that sort of. It was fun to be a part of, and then he obviously had, legendary names like, James Carville and George Stephanopoulos, but he had other people like that around him, just really bright people from, other types of campaigns that were doing things differently than what other people were doing. So to be a part of that was great fun. And, and one of the things I love about, I really encourage young people to get involved in political campaigns, because you just get so much, you get so much responsibility. There's like, here you go, work 7 days a week, as many hours as you can. You get whatever, if you work hard, they'll just give you more responsibility. You don't get paid, or you get paid very little, but you get so much responsibility. And there's a beginning date and there's an end date, and there's a winner and there's a loser. And you go home and you sort of, and that's, and if you're interested in politics, it's either a great way to sort of get involved early on, or just to get it out of your system. And so anyway, so that was fall of 91, and Clinton battled through and ended up getting the nomination. So that summer, so I had worked on, so the fall of 91, all through I guess the second semester of my sophomore year, 92, and then, things broke, and then he went to the national convention, and, I guess he'd already had the country, so he was going to get the nomination. So there really wasn't much to do in Florida. And I wanted to come back to Florida for the summer. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And my dad was an entrepreneur and owned a company. This company, Avanti, was a printing company, and he had creative services and that sort of thing. And he was like, "What are you going to do this summer?" I'm like, "I just got here. I don't know." And he's like, "I had this project I'm working on, trying to get more employee involvement." And again, this is 92. And he's like, "I don't know how to work a computer. I don't know how to do this stuff. I have to do a presentation. And I kind of want to give this to my employees. And I want to interview them, but I don't know how to do that." Or I just didn't want to do it. He goes, "Will you work on this project for me for 2 weeks?" So I'm like, "Great. I got nothing else to do."
Yeah.
And so I go with him every day for 2 weeks, and I'd interview his employees for this particular project that he wanted to get employee feedback, and then, get employee participation. And at the time, like, a big deal was like, creating employee steering committees and total quality management. And he was sort of in manufacturing. So I'm like, "Oh, this is cool." So I did it for 2 weeks. And it was really interesting because at that time, so when he sold his company, actually 20 years ago yesterday, um, and he'd had it for a number of years. And when the time he sold it, he had 1,400 employees. At the time I went to work there, he probably had about 450 employees. And so I went to work with him, and so many of the employees were just so excited to see me, and they'd see me growing up at company picnics, but see me as like an adult and going to work with him, and me talking to them, engaged. And I saw just how enthused they were. And then by the end of those 2 weeks, I really saw sort of, why they were enthused. They're like, "Oh, wow, the next generation is going to take this over. I want to stay at this job forever. And it's good to see that this guy's not going to, sell his business and go on a boat and that sort of thing."
Yeah.
And I saw the impact that, so I wanted to get into politics and government because I thought that's a great way to have an impact on the world. But then I saw, sort of his role as an entrepreneur and job creator, and the impact it has on, very specific families, and sort of this employee participation. We're asking, like, well, what else can we do? And, and all these sorts of things, and really realizing as an employer, again, you can really affect people's lives and make their lives better, or not, or choose not to. And I'm like, wow, that was really impressive, and it really had an impact. So at the end of those 2 weeks, we completed the project. He did like a big presentation. It was great. And I'm like, "All right, you made all these promises. Who's going to take this over on Monday?" And then he's like, "Why don't, what are you doing this summer? Like, why don't you come back?" And I stayed the remainder of that summer and just really loved the employee engagement. Again, the impact you can have on employees.
Yeah.
And he was enthused, and I liked working with him, but I knew that we couldn't work together long term. And so I stayed working with him, off and on, even while I was in college. And the remainder of my 2 years. And I knew like I wanted to start my own business. So when I came back to work with him, or so when I graduated, I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm going to go back and work with him. And I gave it a go to be like, all right, I'm going to, whatever, eventually take over his business. And that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to start my own business.
Yeah.
Started, it was a little too early. Started an internet company called US Web in 1995, and it was web development. So I'd go out to people and go to businesses and say, "Hey, there's this thing called the World Wide Web. You need to be on it. It's going to change everything about your business and the world. You should sell your products on it. You should communicate with your customers. And I do these long presentations, and people would be like, "Oh, wait, is this the same as AOL? How do I get on AOL?" I'm like, "Gosh,
Yeah.
it was just a little too early." I started the business. In hindsight, actually, sort of abandoned that mission a little too early. But I just didn't know. I was too young. Didn't know the internet was too young.
Yeah.
Um, had actually raised capital, had revenue, positive cash flow. It just wasn't. Again, had I known the things that I knew now, to have sort of a board of advisors and all that sort of stuff. And at the time, my dad had, uh, I would go out and pitch to people like, "Hey, you should have an online, catalog." And I went to, there's a big department store down here in Florida. It's called the Florida Department Store. It's called Burdines. I went to Burdines, did a real big pitch. And I remember, like if it were yesterday, boardroom full of, merchandise buyers and heads of, the advertising department, marketing department, and operations department. And after my presentation, they're like, "Eddy," this one guy, his name was Gilbert, and he's like, "That was a great presentation. We have a couple problems with it. Number one, last week, another company came in and did the exact same presentation. And their company's name is Time Warner. And Time Warner at the time had a division called Roadrunner. So Roadrunner, they were going to develop these online channels and that sort of thing. And they were going to, and they go, and so Time Warner came in here and they said that they were going to do it. Time Warner, Eddy Arriola. Okay. They're bigger and better, more, have a better track record. So that's number one. Number two, you're saying that you could do all this for just under $1 million. They're saying that they're going to do it for free and we're going to have a revenue share. So that's problem number two.
Wow.
And they go, problem number three is, if you're right and people go to our website and order shirts and ties and dresses, we have no way of getting them to them because we're a department store and we have sales reps selling stuff to people, and we don't have a place to put these things in a box, and we don't want to have people coming in there and handling returns and that sort of thing. I'm like, well, I can't change my name to Time Warner. We need to have, revenue. So there's nothing I can do about the first two. But the third thing, I can definitely handle. We can set up, a trial program and have a couple SKUs, and they can order a couple products, and we'll pick, pack, and ship it, and we'll do all the online customer service, and we'll set up an 800 number to handle all the customer service.
Yeah.
And we didn't do it with Burdines, but we had a couple other customers. I remember the first one was a tea. Actually, there's been around for 100 years. RC Bigelow Tea.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of Godiva did a little project with us, and a couple others. And it was trial runs. And that's what we did. So we set up the website, and then my father had this big printing company with big warehouses. And I'm like, "Hey, can we take a little space? And I'm going to put some boxes and ship them out. And can we use a conference room to take 800 numbers?" And so that business started to really become our pitch. And over the course of time, sort of that offer became more interesting. And my father's business started to use those services for some of their clients. And the call center fulfillment business just became a much bigger business, and sort of abandoned, the whatchamacallit, the really sort of the web.
The web. Yeah.
Because the other thing was generating revenue and growing and that sort of thing. So that business became what is now Inktel, and sort of the name, and that business has been around for 20 years. And I'm partners with myself and two of my brothers. And yeah, so that's sort of how that emerged.
Can you talk a little bit about, as a young leader, you're making these presentations. How are you building trust with clients? Because I think that can often be a stereotype that's, people don't trust, young CEOs to deliver. They don't have the experience or knowledge, or, they're too helter-skelter.
So, I think one of the things that, as human beings, we have to learn, accept, and the day that you figure this out, it's sort of like a superpower, which is, all the self-doubt that you have as a young CEO, the other guy on the end, 99% of the other people have incredible self-doubt too. So the people that you're pitching, So sometimes you get over it by just having incredible confidence, or or an undeserved ego or whatever it is. But sometimes just being aware, like, oh, that guy's got questions. Like, I know a lot about my stuff. He maybe knows a lot about his stuff. Um, so just having that awareness of like whatever self doubt you have, that they ain't so special either, and they're going to have their own self doubt. So we're kind of on level playing fields. Um, Number one. Number two, on the credibility is have incredible follow up, and that's what I think is a skill that I developed and learned early on, where I'd immediately at the time email or call until if I said I was gonna get them a proposal that day, I was gonna get them a proposal that day. If they made some little comment about um, whatever their favorite color, their favorite sports team, I would follow up. And I think that's a superpower I have, to this day. And so the example when I first, you and I met through the connection at Babson, that when I first spoke to a group, a while back, that was one of the things I said, to this day, I still write handwritten letters and note cards and send them to people. And the amount of people that don't do it is always amazing. And everyone's always so impressed. And everyone I do, it's like, wow, even to this day, it's still powerful. And I could tell you several of the key um, events that have happened to me professionally have been as a result of a handwritten note, where people just like, it really stood out. And I was very specific. It's not like, Arnave, good to meet you and stuff. But it's you and I had a conversation earlier about basketball. Maybe retracing
Detail.
a specific conversation. And again, I can give you so many examples. So follow up and being very specific is one way to to start to build credibility. Of course, the others, you do your homework, you go in prepared, you have a good, a better work product, well-written letter, well-written proposal. You're constantly, learning and growing. Like I was got a pitch yesterday, a Zoom pitch from someone, a startup that's, some banking product. And the second slide in, there's 50 things on the slide.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, like I'm here. One of the reasons I took this is because at a friend of mine's an investor in the company. I go, I know you're here to pitch me, but I'm mostly doing it my friend's name is Alex, as a favor to Alex to assess his investment. I'm looking at this slide. I have no idea what this means. Like, this is, you have 50 things going on. What's the theme of this? What's the one thing I got to know from this slide? And the guy was like pissed off and like offended and like, oh, this really. And I was like, no, but listen to me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm looking at this confused, and especially on Zoom, I'm focusing. I'm like, I'm not listening because I feel. And so I think you just got to, really listen and really learn. And that's one of the ways you build credibility and you respect, these older people in these different positions and be like, all right, they do have something to offer and let me take. So those are some of the ways. Those are some of the ways.
Yeah. No, that level of care of the handwritten note is that's an awesome lesson. You mentioned it a little bit. The partners are your brothers, and you know, um, there's a personal relationship there, right? And then there's also a business relationship and visions and direction of company. I'm curious, in terms of working with family, any lessons or
Yeah, so it's very difficult,
yeah.
and especially the individual. And so like I mentioned, I went to work for my dad, and so my father, when he was, the same age that I was when I first went to work for his father, and very shortly they had a falling out, and then they didn't work together, and my father had a terrible experience. So that was one thing that he was very conscious of, um, was his terrible. So he never pushed any of us uh, into the business. So that's why for me going to work wasn't sort of something that was expected. It was just sort of, hey, I got nothing going on. Let me go do it. So I never really felt any pressure to do it because he had such a bad experience. And my father and I are very, very different, and not better, but it's very different. And And so he was very aware of that and didn't want to sort of push it and that sort of thing. So I would say we had a good working relationship, but we just never meant to be partners, or so we never had a falling out. We never had anything. Um, uh, but we had to sort of know each other, and and I always I sort of wanted to go do something different because I just couldn't separate the two, and it was hard for him to be do I work for him, are we partners, is he my dad, how much do I get involved, when I hear other people that work for him do or say things, and he doesn't sort of fire this guy and gives favoritism to this guy, I can't internalize it. So I just didn't like it, and I just couldn't manage that internally, so that's why I sort of didn't stay with it. um and then working with my brothers, we don't work together anymore. They run that business. I'm out of it. They really run. I shouldn't say that. They run that business. I'm a passive shareholder there. Um, they really run that business and have done phenomenally well. And it's very difficult. And so what worked was that there was three brothers, so we sort of had one. One of us would drive another crazy, so you have someone to talk about it. But it's a very difficult thing to how do you separate again sort of do you get together on the weekends or not, when do you talk about work or not, what are the different ambitions or goals, how you incorporate spouses and that other sort of thing. It's very, very hard. And I always in my business as a community bank, we focus on entrepreneurs and family-owned businesses. And I think one of the reasons we've had success is I go into a family business, I get the stories, I get the father-son relationships, the brother-sister relationships, the husband-wife, the divorces. I play sort of advisor to these people, and I think that's one of the reasons, again, why we've been able to go after that market. But I think it's so hard, and why as human beings we're attracted to TV shows like Succession or Shakespearean drama, and it's these stories have been with us forever. So
Yeah. One other, you know, thing, especially because you hadn't, worked at a huge, big company. I'm curious, how were you able to build a corporate culture that, you know, the processes of,
yeah,
human resources and all. I mean, because, it's one thing for someone to experience that for 10 years at Morgan Stanley. And then,
yeah,
if they start their own bank, they have that, okay, this is, how HR runs. How did you guys, build
yeah,
that professionalism and that structure?
yeah. So a couple things. One was because it sort of fell into it. So so I did have a little experience. And then my father, he had a business and he had a bunch of employees, so I saw sort of the value
True, true.
of a
Yeah.
corporate culture, and the role a CEO plays, and how you treat people, and that sort of thing. So I had a little bit of exposure to study a little bit of business. I was very I've always been an active reader, and like I said, I was I since my freshman year in high school, read the Wall Street Journal every day. I was just very interested in sort of the machine of business. But the other thing I picked up really early on was, you know, for better, like I said, in this internet business, I was calling on large companies. And so I'd have to learn how to navigate through, like, who's the, all right, they match me up with the IT person. No, I want to talk to the marketing person. No, the real decision maker here. And so I would see how, whether consciously or not, how decisions are made in organizations and what works and what doesn't. And so just sort of being an observer of how big companies work. And I've always worked with, I shouldn't say always, that for the first part of my career, I worked with big companies and learned how they work and how they think and how they make decisions and what works and what doesn't. Um, and that's helped me, start a business and incorporate, have, uh, um, a smaller business than some of, my old clients, but able to incorporate, again, literally every day, I go back and, rethink, with my management team, again, corporate culture and the importance of organization, how we make decisions, um, and it's been sort of a lifetime of business experience. But also, even now, it's executive education, it's constant learning. Um,
Yeah.
it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. I saw that you were a board member for Total Bank. Is that does that have a big impact on, sparking the interest and, eventually starting Apollo Bank?
Yeah. So the biggest, so like I said, so as an entrepreneur, interested in business, started, this particular, these different businesses, because along the way, there's other things we started and were successful, not whatever. But I was just very, very interested in business, and at a whole different sort of story when after I hit age 30, I sort of like, what do I want to do with sort of the rest of my life? Where am I? And at the time, being an entrepreneur, again, I think it's a young person's game, because it's constant. It's always on your mind. So if you're not putting in the hours at the office, it's all encompassing. You're just always thinking about it. And I had kids, and I was always on the road, and I'm like, man, I just can't do this forever. It's eating me. And like I said, my brothers, my two partners, and just going crazy. And so I at age 30, I don't want to say I freaked out, but I was like, what am I doing? And over the course of, um, 2 years, sort of thought of it. When I turned 32, I said, not because I was 32, just so happens it took me sort of 2 years to sort of play this out in my head. I'm like, and I graduated when I was 22, graduated from college. I'm like, I want the next 10 years to look much different than my last 10 years. And so I'm like, literally wrote a 10-year plan, and I called it Project 42. And I'm like, these are all the steps I want to do. And that's what I talked about earlier with you. I really do believe that you can, sort of, create a skeleton script for what you want your life to be. And from that Project 42, that 10-year plan, I can't tell you how much was dead on. And so one of the things I was like, I want to start a different business in a different industry. And I want to learn more about different industries that I'm not involved in, including finance. And I want to be involved in as a board member of another organization. And I want to focus more on a business that's more local based, because at the time I was calling on Fortune 500 companies in our other business, and I was always on the road, and I was in Columbus, Ohio, or Seattle, Washington, or just all over. And I didn't. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to, part of my personal scorecard was, how many nights a week am I going to have dinner with my kids? And if I was in that other job, I couldn't do that. Like I was never going to hit my benchmark. So, anyways, again, sort of, long story. Kind of like, you put it out there, and you just become more aware. If you write it down and you articulate it when the opportunity comes up. And there was a little bank here called Total Bank in Miami that was having some different issues, and it had one supermajority shareholder. And it was sort of a family friend, someone I knew. And this woman who was a supermajority shareholder was having trouble recruiting board members. And a community bank, you get board members from your community that have access to your community, know what's going on, and you have governance, because a bank board members are not just responsible to the shareholders, they're also responsible to the depositors. You have FDIC insurance. So this woman was trying to put together, board directors, and she struggled. And she's like, I want young people that are really involved. And she approached me and said, I'll give you an opportunity to invest, and I'll give you an opportunity to be on the board of directors. But you got to work really hard, and you got to really learn the business. And I'm like, this is exactly what I wanted. And so I had an incredible experience, and really liked the idea of a community bank and building. And not because of me, but while I was there, I went from a small little bank that wasn't profitable and had some regulatory issues to growing in 5 years. So it went from $450 million in assets, and then 5 years later to $1.7 billion in assets, went from unprofitable to one of the most profitable banks, sold for a record price. It was a great story. And that was in November of 2007. And along the way, I said, one day I'd love to do this on my own. I'd love to start a bank. And at the time I was, again, my mid 30s. And one day when I'm in my 60s, I want to start a bank. I want to be involved in my community. I want to build a business that does well by the community, but is also good for shareholders. Then we had this event in 2007. it was a, a good financial event for me. It wasn't, all the money in the world, but it was good. And a lot of other really well run community banks in our community had been sold. And then the financial crisis came. So it was like this service void, and then the financial crisis. And at the time I went, so I don't know if you're familiar with an organization called YPO. I'm a member of YPO. It's one of the
Mm.
best. So three best things I ever did professionally. One was join this organization. The original was called. I joined an organization called EO. It has a sister organization or called YPO. And so joining the those organizations is the best thing. I enrolled in a 3-year executive education program at Harvard Business School called OPM, Owner President Management. Again, sort of greater appreciation for the machine of business. And the third thing was, starting a bank. And I didn't, and so at the time I was part of this organization, YPO, and what's called the forum, sort of like this little mini group of personal board of directors. I had presented a business idea. I'm like, I'm going to break off from working with my brothers. I want to start my own business. And I presented an idea, and it was a social media idea. I didn't know what I was doing, but I'm like, oh, social media is the thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, you didn't even understand what you just presented. You have no, like, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I thought, and they were all like, we thought you were going to present a bank. That's an exciting idea. I'm like, no, I want to do that like 30 years from now. And they're like, do it now. Now's the time. You're going to start a business. You just had this event. There's an opportunity. And there's this, at the time it wasn't a financial crisis. It was, hey, there's this like banking recession. Like by the time you start up, it'll all be over. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And I'm like, yeah, I've never worked in a bank. I was a board member, but and I went around the country, talked to 40 different people that had started a bank and said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What are your thoughts? Who else should I talk to? And I had this little red notebook and filled it up and put together a game plan that most people, including my father, said, you're crazy. It's not going to work. And I remember telling my father, and my father being like, it's really sad that you're not going to work with your brothers anymore. You're going to run out of money. Don't come to me. And this may be the dumbest thing you've ever done. I'm like, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And my brothers were incredibly supportive. And yeah, and just, went through and had never raised money, had to raise money, again, during a financial crisis. And then that's a whole other super long story.
Talk to me about how you manage fear, because I mean that's one thing. It's one thing if you work at a bank for 20 years and then you're like, okay, I want to start a bank, but your experiences are in, telemarketing and things of that nature, and then obviously you have this board member experience, but I mean, to a certain point, you had to manage fear at a pretty good level to be able to have, you know,
Yeah.
the desire to start, a bank on your
Yeah.
own.
So I would say that the number one way is, it's always worked for me to have, a plan. So, like I said, I had this 10-year plan, Project 42, started when I was 32. And if I were to go back and show you all the things that I wrote out, it'd be ridiculous how much I accomplished. And I remember sort of like towards the end of that Project 42 being like, holy shit, like this thing really worked. One, that's scary. And then two, like, why didn't I shoot higher? Imagine if I would have shot higher. And then, yeah. And then, so that's one thing. So I'd always go back to that. And even now, so I have a new, when I had sort of this event and COVID, I redid my plan. So now, I have this, project 48, restarted and recalibrated, and project 58. And I certainly so I revisited yesterday, because yesterday was February 1. So now I'm telling you, I want to make sure I revisit this 10-year plan, which works back to a 5-year plan, which works back to a 3-year plan, which works back to a 1-year plan. And so I just always like, that's my guiding, sort of, it's my roadmap. And so the map is not the terrain, but it helps you sort of show you, where you want to go and how you're going to get there, and you recalibrate. So one big thing is knowing where you want to go and having an idea of how you're going to get there. So when I've been confronted with issues, I just go back to, I'm like, all right, I'm supposed to do this. This is the, and I've growing up, and like you asked me, in high school, I was a competitive wrestler and competed nationally, and it, you have to do the work, and wrestling's one of those sports where it's like, I broke, my hand several times, my nose several times, and a bunch of other stuff, and you got to do the work, but you know that if you run the miles and you practice all the double legs and you do, like, you put in the work over the course of time, like it's you're going to get to a certain goal. So yeah, so the business plan, long-term plan, so that's one. Second is sort of like to name the fear. So like, I'm big into journaling, and I'll even do, it's called noting. So if I'm like, why am I paralyzed right now, why am I, and I'll literally note down, like, it's this specific thing. It's I'll try to drill down it, and it's whatever. I'm, fear of being, why is it so difficult to make this phone call? It's a fear of maybe being rejected, or it's fear that I don't feel I have enough information, or fear that this person won't accept me or like me. And I'll be like, well, who cares if he like, but it's funny because inside I'll be like, I want this person to like me. And then when I give it a name and write it down, I'm like, I really don't care if that person likes me. Why has that been holding me back? But
Yeah.
it's only through sort of naming it and talking, talking about it in a sense with myself. So those are two of the ways. I've really never had, mentors or people that I can go to. I have some peers that I go to, but never really had. And that's one of the things I sort of always working for yourself. It's hard to find uh, mentors, and if you're always the boss and always the person, it's very hard to put yourself in a vulnerable position and go out to find people to talk to and that sort of thing.
I'm also curious, your personal life. You're married, you have kids at this point. You know, maybe you have a mortgage. How are you? Is your wife just always very super supportive, or like, I mean, because to make that big of a decision,
Yeah, so I would tell you. So, and it's not bullshit. It's my wife is incredibly supportive. It's, it's ridiculous. So I remember, again, hey, I want to start a bank. I mean, it's so weird. And she'd actually worked in banking, and she hated it. She hated banks. She hated banking. She was in a brief period of time and left it. She's like, I hate banks. I hate the culture of rule following, and regulations, and just sort of, the only way you can move up if the person ahead of you dies, and that's. And I also sort of saw what she was doing, like, oh, I'm smarter than all those people. I can figure that out.
yeah,
And when I told her that was what I wanted to do, um, she's like, all right, whatever you want. And then, so, but we set some sort of, um, some, some sort of, guardrails where it was, at the time, our kids were in a really good private school where we loved the other parents and the kids lived. And so she was like, all right, I don't care if we go back to zero, but zero can't mean that our kids suffer. I want to keep them in this school. So we don't have to buy a bigger house. We don't have to buy, a boat or whatever it is. But I want to keep the kids in this school because it makes me happy, makes them happy. And they're going to, their education is really important to us. So some of those things we sort of, laid it out, and she was, incredibly supportive. And I remember the day I'm like, all right, it was January 15th, 2008. I'm like, all right, I'm going to start going through this process. This is the day. And she bought this beautiful brown leather briefcase for me, and she had a handwritten note in there, and word of encouragement. And she's like, good luck, and is very supportive. And so that was, and different things throughout life. She's been, incredibly supportive. So that was, that was great. It has been great, even through all that we've been through. But one of the things, going back to this again, sort of Project 42, and I knew that is, my own personal, KPIs, and live them, so, one of the things, going back to when I was in my early 30s, one of the things was, I want to make sure I'm home, more time with my kids. When I told my wife why I was doing these things, she's like, yeah, those are the things I want in my life too. And, I wanted to be involved in a business that was deeply rooted in the community. And she's involved in many charities, and has been and led a bunch of not-for-profits. And so we had sort of the same, sort of guiding principles and sort of again sort of these KPIs, and yeah, and even moving forward. I mean, I still stick by these KPIs, and she's on board, and um,
The other thing I wanted to ask was, I always ask this with, successful entrepreneurs. When I don't know if you can bring yourself to the 2008 mindset, but did you consider failure? I mean, obviously now,
yeah,
12 years later, obviously you're the furthest thing from failing, but
yeah. So,
at
but I
that
think
year one, year zero stage.
all the time, like when I find myself sort of, I'm like, um, what's the worst that can happen? So I run, and so I run a lot. I don't run to win races. I don't measure my time. It's sort of my therapy, and when I do run, I'll go through a couple of different mental exercises. And so um, one will be, as an example, if I'm really sort of scared about something or worried about something, I'll sort of work through what are all the different worst case scenarios. Um, can they eat me? Can they torture me? Um, will I be thrown in jail? And I'm like, the answer to everything, at least that I've faced, has been no. I'm like, all right, so I'm not going to be tortured by lions. I'm not going to be put in jail. Um, and then I start, working back. I'm like, am I going to lose my house? Am I, my kids like, and so I'm like, all right, so the really, really bad shit ain't going to happen. And then so I work, and then so I'm like, okay, what really can happen? Oh, okay, this is, this particular situation, it might end in a lawsuit. All right, so let me work through. Well, if I'm going to be in a lawsuit, who do I want on my side? Is it the lawyer I currently have? Do I need to get a lawyer that's in DC? Whatever. And so that's sort of one of the ways that I address it. Another is, you were talking about going back to 2010. I would say two of the people that I talk to the most often is uh, my future self and my past self. So literally this weekend, I guess it was Sunday, like I was going to go running. I'm like, here's the thing I'm going to think about. I'm going to, the 18, so I'm 48, the 18-year-old Eddy, what would he say about me now? And what would I say to him? If I only had 2 minutes, what would I tell him? And then I get zapped back into the future. And then the 28-year-old Eddy, what would I tell him if I only had 2 minutes? And what would, if he saw me right now, what would he say about it? And then the same, the Eddy of 2010, the 38-year-old, what would he say about me right now? And what do I want to tell him if I only had those 2 minutes? So I do that, pretty often.
Yeah.
And I write that down. I have a journal. I have this, like I said, this personal project pen that I go back and, oh yeah, that was, sort of one of the things. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let me go think about this, and sort of work myself while I was running, work myself through talking to the 18-year-old me, and back, so yeah.
I don't want to say that banking is commoditized, but a lot of it, it's streamlined, right? There's
It
mortgages,
is.
there's
It
business
is
loans.
super, especially the banking that we do. It's super commoditized, and so there's 5,000 community or 5,000 banks in the country. There is a me in every single city, if not one. I shouldn't say me like an entrepreneurial sort of CEO, but there's a CEO running, around $1 billion bank in every market, and so I say that because I reach out to a lot of those in different markets, and we're like, hey, you do exactly my job, but we don't compete. Let's, how do you compete in your
Yeah.
market? So yeah,
Yeah.
it's very hard to differentiate ourselves.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask is, especially in those early years, how are you differentiating yourself as a bank? Especially cuz you don't have, it's not been the neighborhood bank for the last 20 years. It's a start, like it's not a startup, but you're building
Yeah, so
the
banking is a
credibility.
little bit different because you in order to get to day one, you have a certain level of credential. So you have to get regulatory approval. You have to have a certain amount of capital. We had started originally as it's called a de novo bank. We were going to start from scratch. We ended up acquiring a little bank. That was a whole other sort of crazy scenario. I'd never acquired a company to raise capital, and I did those. So there is some instant credibility, and again, in the nature of my business, a lot of it's about personal service. So I built a management team that I was able to leverage, um, their credibility. So the guy, I knew that. So when I went around and talked to these 40 different people and all the, when I first started bank, they're like, hey, you have great ideas. You seem like you're going to be successful, but you need an old gray haired person that's going to stand by your side. And so I had a guy who was, the president of our bank for, the first 7 years. And I sort of leveraged, his credibility. So those are some of the ways. And then again, I thought I could get into this business and have some, sort of initial success in that it was really going to focus on service. And I thought we can outservice sort of bank, bigger banks and more traditional banks that are, very much rigid and I sort of build this as, by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs, focused on a specific market, and said, we think like business people, not like bankers. We're going to, so it had sort of um, this certain service mentality that resonated with our targeted market. And yeah.
One other thing, and I probably should have asked it earlier, everybody talks about getting, raising capital and investors. Convincing can be a hard thing. Getting the hard yes. Any thoughts on, how you were able to convince those people? What did they see in you, or what did they see in your
Yeah,
pitch?
to this day, and so I can say because it was so long ago. I mean, I don't know how they invested, and because I've seen as I've sort of, advanced my career and built up my own wealth and looked at different investments. Like I never would have invested in this venture at that time with me and that sort of thing. So first off, my pitch was always a well-run community bank is a good long-term investment, and I had sort of data and information to show that, and especially in a growing market like Florida and specifically South Florida. So I had sort of data to show if I'm average or above average, and I do all the because like you said, it's sort of commoditized, it's sort of a proven business model. So again, mine is different than if you're trying to create a new social media company. I had hey, this thing works. I'm following almost like a franchise model. Like this model works. If you do a good job, if you hit all these things, it's at least a safe investment. And we're in a growing market. And I think that I can be better than average. So I had to sort of give them reasons why I thought we could be better than average, because I have contacts and we're going to put this, this specific type of service mentality and a service focus and go after this certain business group. And we're going to be a little bit better at sales and that sort of thing. So that's sort of, how we sort of got the investor, so that was the initial, sort of pitch to investors. And there is, a track record in investing in banks. So I could show them again, show a lot of data, and there are folks that like to invest in banks. So even now, even though I said I wouldn't invest in some guy that sounded like me back then, I have made other investments in banks and sort of know which ones are good and not.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask was, 850 million in, 12 years. That's pretty impressive growth. Um, a lot of community banks stay at a certain level and kind of stick there. What's been the key to, is it new customers? Is it existing customers? You just got lucky and their business is growing, or what's the key to that?
Yeah, right. So, so in no particular order, we're definitely in a growing market. Miami has been great over the last 10 years. There was, again, sort of the original, premise of starting the business. There was sort of this void in the marketplace. They needed a, service-oriented bank towards a particular market, and then just, delivering, having really good service. Our business is very much a word of mouth business. So one of the things that I really liked about banking is so our demographic, or so our target market is professional, small to mid-sized businesses. That profile of client stays with their bank for an average of 12 years. So that tells me that, I went to sleep December 31st. So that $850 million number was our December 31st number. I went to sleep December 31st and our bank was $850 million in assets. I woke up January 1 we were $850 million in assets. I wasn't worried about anyone really leaving. People don't wake up one day and be like, I'm switching my bank today, and I may switch it again next week. You just don't do that. So that's great news that it's a very, very sticky product. The bad news is they don't do that when they're ranking with someone else. So to get people to switch is very, very difficult. So you got to be in the right place, right time, have referrals, and referral and word of mouth business is what's most important to a bank.
Yeah. Uh, you know,
so I just wanted to give you a quick heads up, and I'm sorry to do this.
yeah.
I need to drop off at like 20 minutes, maybe like at 7:43, maybe.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll ask, yeah. Um, you know, as you look at your business journey, obviously you've grown in revenue, you've grown in people over these last, 12 years or so. Any business lessons that you can give to, any CEOs or entrepreneurs or anything like
Yeah.
that
So
from.
one of the things that I would, to a especially any CEO, especially a new CEO or a young CEO or an entrepreneur, is don't underestimate how much effort you're going to need to put into managing your own psychology. I think managing the CEO managing their own psychology is the most important thing they can do and the hardest thing that they can do in terms of, they're, you're the one that needs to, you're the captain, you're the captain of the ship. And so you need to, have the strong hand at times or the steady hand at times. And you may feel fear, but you need to, you know, um, reserve it and not show it to other people. You need to know when, like, I know you're a basketball fan. So I heard an interview the other day with Doc Rivers. Did you ever hear the podcast with Brian Koppelman?
No, I haven't.
Brian Koppelman has a podcast called In the Moment anyways, and he interviews Doc Rivers. And that's
Yeah.
one of the questions. And he's like, when do you yell at a guy and when do you give him a pat on the back? And when he's like, that's very, very hard. And he's like, one of the things you have to really you have to do the work and realize, why is that guy underperforming? Is it because he's dogging it? Or maybe he's just putting too much pressure on himself. And he goes, and I'll go in and I'll talk to my assistant coach. I'm like, what's going on with that guy? And it's like, man, the guy's coming in earlier than anyone else. And he's taken, 1,000 shots, but he's just putting too much pressure on himself. And he goes, and another time, it'll be a guy is dogging it. He is staying out till 4 o'clock. And he goes, but when I have that conversation with the guy, I got to get it right. Because if I tell him you're being lazy and his real issue is that he's coming in and putting too much pressure, I've lost him. And if I tell him to relax and he's really been staying out till 4 o'clock in the morning, then he's going to go another way too. And so just managing your own psychology and having to so much effort into managing people. And so I always tell our managers and stuff man, so right now we have performance review. I put such an emphasis on performance reviews, and having sort of good narratives and very strong one-on-one conversations, because you have to have really good, honest conversations with people. It's the only way they're going to get better. The only way they're going to improve. You have to force a lot of people aren't good at self-reflection. So you have to force that self-reflection. And so you don't learn from experience. You only learn from, your reflection on that experience. So put a great deal of emphasis on that. And again, sort of managing your own psychology. Who are you talking to? How do you deal with fear? How do you deal, with even motivating yourself? How do you deal with issues with, your spouse or your family, or if you're, maybe you're alone and that's a good thing or a bad thing. So that whole thing, it's just constant.
Yeah.
And so you have to find outlets for that.
Yeah. Okay. I got two more questions before
Great.
you leave. First is, I asked you about it earlier, but at your level, how do you manage work-life balance, or do you believe in that, or what are your thoughts on
I
that?
absolutely believe in that. So so again, I went back to, like I said, my KPIs, my personal scorecards. So one of the things I hope not too many of my employees watch this. So one of the things is, so I don't respond to emails at night. That's not true. I don't send emails at night. So I'll respond to them and I'll put send later. And it'll be, so all my employees think I get up and start sending emails at 6 a.m. No, I'm doing them like now. So I'll do them maybe from 6 p.m. to 7:30, 8 p.m. or whatever, because I don't want them being at home. It's just my thing. I don't want them being at home and having to worry about my emails and the response. And I don't want to get their response while I'm home. And they know I'm home. And I don't work on the weekends unless I have to. I mean, there were times when I did do that, but I don't do it. And so I just had a key executive come to our bank that just started middle of January. So he just started, and he was a top guy in our industry and in our market. And he came from a bank much bigger. It was a key executive, and it was a crazy environment over there. And he was really excited to come here. And I'm like, just so you know, we have a lot of work to do. I'm never going to call you on the weekend. If I call you, it's going to be about a sporting event, or because I saw you driving down the street and thought of something. If I send you an email at night, it's going to be really important. I'm not going to send you on silly stuff. And that's just how I want my life. Now, maybe our bank would be twice as big or so. I don't know, but that's just not what I want to do. So I'm in a position, fortunately, where I can call the shots. It's not like I have VC money and people say, no, you got to grow 75% per year for the next 3 years. I just happen to be in a different situation that I designed, again, sort of going back with, here's our game plan, here's what we're going to do, because that's what I want. If I can convince everybody to buy in, I'm going to stick to that. So I'm very much into, like I said, I run when I can to sort of manage, my own well-being and my own mental health. Again, I set sort of, what are the guidelines? My financial goals are tied to, what my wife and I, want and need, and set it within, sort of reasonable boundaries. But that's very, very important, because even though again, sort of work-life balance, I still take work home. And last night I was thinking about woke up in the middle of the night, my wife's like, what is it? I'm like, nothing. It was, I had 4 or 5 things in my mind, because it's always with you. So I think you have to do the best you can. And that's just the position I'm in. And there's other people that you don't have that luxury. You have to work 80 hours, but know what know what price you're paying.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to ask, you know, for someone like you who's accomplished so much in the business world, what motivates you? Because, a lot of people, I think, are working to get to the level that you are, maybe in their 30s and 40s. How do you, like, what gets you out of bed? I mean, you've done so much.
Yeah. So it really goes back, and it's a little cliche, but it's about, finding your why and all that sort of stuff. And that's hard. It's harder than, so, we didn't really touch on, I guess, we could go on. So I told you about this 10-year plan. We started, so bought this, started up this bank. By the time we really started, it was March 15, 2010. Again, love 10-year plans. I had a 10-year plan. We're going to get to a certain size by all the parameters. Like, we're going to grow this fast, but I'm not going to do all these other crazy things. I'm not going to, again, key metric, my kids were growing up. I want to spend, a certain amount of time having dinner with them. At any given moment, my daughter's playing soccer. My son's a musician. I want to be able to get him. So I want to build an organization that's like, bye, see you later. Not everybody can do that. So I sort of had this plan. I had, my board of directors and everything, and we hit every plan. And at the 10-year mark, I told myself that if we get to a certain size and we do all these things and I get a certain offer to sell the bank, I want to sell the bank. Almost 10 years to the date, guy comes in and says, you've sort of talked about this. Someone hit your number and they hit these metrics that you'd sell the bank. And we had someone come in, and it was, they had to hit a certain price. They had to, I had certain, things that they had to hit, sort of a scenario that they need to have for my situation. I wanted them to keep 100% of our employees. We're very involved in our community. I wanted them to continue to be involved in our community. And I wanted a very easy transaction. I didn't want to have a public auction. I wanted to work with an easygoing party, and we had that, and we announced the sale. And my board of directors didn't even know I was working on it. They were gone for the summer, came back, I presented it, and they're like, "This is exactly what you said you would say yes to. I guess this is what you want to do." And we announced it, and our employees, they were all keeping their jobs and had interesting opportunities. And I loved sort of working with what was going to be my potential boss. And it was a 10-year plan, and it was, smooth sailing. And at the time, first week of March 2010, I was talking to my wife, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know I had this 10-year plan and everything worked as I thought it would. And it's so great, but I have no idea what the next 10 years is going to be like. And I was kind of freaking out. And this thing like COVID, they're like, hey, you might have to stay at home. I'm like, oh, good. I'm going to take those 2 weeks and I'm going to think about what I want. And then fast forward, it was family safety, my kids coming back home, employee safety, creating a remote workforce, banks being an essential business. So being able to meet client needs and them, worrying about panic, then PPP. We were almost fully integrated with this acquirer. Um, and started to realize that the economy was taking a turn. I'm like, oh shit, like this might not close. They might not get regulatory approval. And grinding. And we are supposed to close at the end of May. First week of May, get a phone call from the regulators, and they said, this is, you can't close this deal. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and the world might come to an end. What do what to them really, what are you guys doing, expanding your business and making a significant capital investment in a whole new market and that sort of thing. And outside of our control, we didn't get regulatory approval, and it was crazy. That's not what I expected. Everything had gone right. It was something completely outside my control. Me and the other CEO, we never got in a fight. We never raised our voice. It was no, as lawyers could sort of doctor up how we ended things, but we were never upset. The guy lives in Tampa, so we were texting about Tampa Bay, Buccaneers. We still have a great relationship.
Yeah.
And it was so crazy weird that everything I wanted, everything I accomplished, everything that I wanted to accomplish happened. And like the analogy I use is like, I was flying this long distance flight, and it's going across the world, and everything goes smooth, and I have all these passengers and coming in for a landing, and we're like just coming in for a landing, and like we're 10 feet off the ground, and all of a sudden I need to pull up because I think we're going to crash and we're all going to die, and I pull up and we're able to save the day, and we're up, and I'm like, what the hell goes next? And so when we announced the sale, the cancellation of the deal, I was devastated. What's next? But I need to put on a good face. So I told our shareholders, and all of our shareholders were like, hey, it's COVID. All of our businesses are going crazy. This isn't what we wanted to hear, but it ain't your fault. Do what you can to sort of keep the business going. I had to tell our employees, I remember it was, like a night like this, it was, working late, and what I'm going to tell our employees. I scheduled to meet a conference call, a Zoom call for everybody. Again, it's beginning of May, so everyone's still freaked out about health. So they thought it was a health related issue. And we had an 8 a.m. Zoom call and told everybody, hey, we're not going to do the merger anymore. We're going to Apollo Bank. It's Apollo Bank 2.0. We're going to make this bigger, better, stronger. And if you would have seen my screen, you'd think we'd won the Super Bowl. And everyone's like, so this is great. We're so excited. We signed up to be employees of Apollo Bank, not of this other organization, even though that was going to be, thanks for keeping 100% of our jobs. This is what we want to do. We're behind you. What is Apollo Bank 2.0? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like I made that up, like and seeing that. And then our clients were like, hey, we signed up to work with you guys, as long as it's the same team, same technology, that sort of thing, we're ready to move. So we didn't lose any clients. If anything, we've only grown. But being able to say, like, I thought I was struggling for what comes next after Apollo, but now I got to figure out what's next for Apollo, which that's a scenario I never described. And so, like I said, it was like I was coming in for a landing, pull up, we didn't crash, no one died. All of a sudden, everyone's on the planes cheering. The people in the flight tower are saying, great job. And I'm like, what do I do now? Do I come back around and try to land again? Do I land somewhere else and refuel? How do I refuel both myself and everyone? Is anybody getting off the plane? Or do I just make no, what I have to do is plan the next long-term journey. And so setting the goals and trying to figure out, and it was not easy, man. It was not easy for that.
No, it doesn't sound like it.
Clients and client, put the best face forward for, clients and employees and that sort of thing. And really find why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And it's been, a hard couple months. And I went back to, some of the same things I humbly, believe that, one of the great, that I was a part of, saving jobs, through PPP and keeping our business strong, keep during this pandemic, that we were still lending and working with clients during this pandemic, that we kept our employees safe. And there was a lot of things that we've done. So one of the things I'm most proud of, um, for like 5 years running, or maybe even more, we've been ranked as one of the top places to work in the state of Florida. Nationally, we're one of the top 25 banks to work for in the country. So we've just created
Wow.
this great environment
Yeah.
where it's employees, employees, employees. We're going to create, great experience and be really involved in our community. And so I had to remind myself, like, those are the things that really made me happy. And I had to talk to myself. I'm like, all right, what was I really excited about doing sort of, post sale? How do I make this thing right now, Apollo Bank 2.0, feel like or look like the things that I was really excited about? So I've done a bunch. I'm in the process of doing. So brought in, a new executive management team, some new team members, working on rebranding. Um, so one of the things that I'm, really interested in, Kara, is like mindfulness. So now we're, I told our executive manager, I'm like, I'm working with a mindfulness coach, and I'm opening up to all of you, and we're going to roll it out there, the entire organization, and all of you. You don't have to stick with it, but you need to do it for the next you need to work with this woman for the next 4 weeks. And so I'm like, so I'm trying to do a bunch of those little things and incorporate to make it feel like, the next thing that I wanted to do, as opposed to just sort of, we're going into the 10th inning, and we need to end this game. No, it's a whole new season.
Yeah. That's awesome. Uh, Eddie, we talked about good amount in this time. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, I really enjoyed it. I appreciate your questions and what you're working to do with this podcast. And I think it's, I don't know how helpful I am to will be to anyone that hears it, but I think the stories, the human stories of how people deal with real everyday challenges. So I'm a big fan of Elon Musk. I think listening to Elon Musk is really dangerous for the average person, because Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are not normal people, and you should not model your life around them and their accomplishments. And you have to look to others to hear their stories and how they, and again, go back to, what's your personal scorecard? So Elon Musk wants to live on Mars. Is that your goal? God bless him. I'm glad he's doing it. I don't want to live on Mars.
Yeah.
Um, and so really define, what your own personal KPIs, what your own personal metrics, and just stick to that, and don't worry about the Joneses or what Elon Musk is doing, and really focus on, on your own life and making it better.
Yeah. Eddie, I just want to thank you. It was really cool meeting you and learning from your story. Um, just you know the amount of I still am amazed that someone who had never worked in banking, obviously you were on board member, but with it, and then started your own bank and have now built it to close to 1 billion in total assets in 12 years. That's quite
Yeah.
the accomplishment. And
Thank you.
through it all, it seems like you've done a good job of continuing to value personal life and things of that nature, which is just great to see that people can see, you know, you can be successful and um, you don't have to sacrifice, everything for it. So
You
thank
do,
you.
yeah, you don't have to sacrifice everything, but you have to sacrifice some things.
Yes, yes. No, no, for sure. But yeah, so thank you
No,
for
I'm glad we
joining
could
us.
really enjoy it, and I hope we stay in touch, and yeah, I'll follow up with an email and a note, and yeah. So
Sounds good. Sounds good.
go BC Eagles.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir. Thank
All
you.
right. Take care. Thanks so much.